Commander Sarah Chun stood at the bridge of the UE's Defiance, watching the alien ships through the main screen. 3 massive vessels hung in space like metal flowers, their surfaces gleaming with strange patterns that hurt to look at directly. Each ship was twice the size of her own, and they had appeared without warning at the edge of Zephorian space. The communications officer turned to face her. "Ma'am, they're responding to our signal," Sarah nodded. She had been preparing for this moment for 3 years. First contact with an alien species was what every deep space commander dreamed of. But now that it was happening, her stomach felt tight with worry. The Zephorians were known throughout this part of the galaxy. Every species they had met spoke of them with a mixture of fear and respect. "Put them through," she said. The screen flickered and an alien face appeared. The being had pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer like water and large black eyes that reflected light like mirrors. Its head was elongated, and where a human would have a nose, there was just a small opening. When it spoke, its voice came through the translators as smooth and cold. "I am Mind Seeker Veltar of the Zephirian Collective," the alien said. "You have entered our protected space without permission. State your purpose, humans." Sarah stepped forward. She had practiced this speech dozens of times, but her heart still beat fast. "I am Commander Sarah Chun of the United Earthship Defiance. We come in peace, seeking diplomatic relations with your people. We had no intention of violating your territory." Veltar's head tilted slightly. "Humans, yes, we have heard whispers of your kind. Young species, loud minds. You spread across your local systems like, what is your word? Weeds." The insult was clear, but Sarah kept her face calm. "We are explorers and scientists. We seek knowledge and friendship with other species." "Friendship," Veltar repeated, as if the word tasted strange. "An interesting concept. We do not need friendship. We have order. We have understanding. We know the thoughts of all who serve us." Sarah felt a chill at those words. The reports from other species had mentioned this. The Zephirians were telepaths. They could read minds. It was how they controlled their vast empire. No one could lie to them. No one could hide their true intentions. "Perhaps we could meet in person," Sarah suggested. "Discuss terms for safe passage through your space." Veltar was quiet for a long moment. Then something that might have been a smile crossed its face. "Yes, we will meet. Your ship will dock with ours. You will bring 5 of your crew. We will bring 5 of ours. But know this, human, we will see into your minds. We will know your true purpose. Deception is impossible." The screen went dark. Sarah's second-in-command, Lieutenant Rodriguez, stepped beside her. "Commander, are you sure about this? If they can really read minds, then we have nothing to hide," Sarah said, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. "We came here for peaceful contact. That's the truth." 2 hours later, Sarah stood in the docking bay with 4 other officers. She had chosen her team carefully. Dr. Martinez, their head scientist, Security Chief Thompson, Communications Officer Park, and Engineer Walsh. All good people, all loyal, all brave enough to face whatever waited for them. The airlock opened with a soft hiss. The Zephirian ship beyond was strange. The corridors were too tall and too narrow for humans. The walls seemed to glow with a soft light that came from nowhere. Everything was perfectly clean and ordered. Veltar waited in what must have been a meeting room. The chamber was circular, with a table that seemed to be grown from the floor rather than built. 4 other Zephirians stood behind their leader. They all looked similar: pale blue skin, dark eyes, long heads. But each had different patterns of silver lines running across their faces. "Welcome, humans," Veltar said. "Be seated." The chairs were uncomfortable for human bodies, but Sarah and her team sat down. Across from them, the Zephirians did the same. "Let us begin," Veltar said. "You claim to come in peace. But words are easy. Thoughts do not lie. With your permission, I will read your minds and verify your intentions. Sarah felt her team tense beside her. This was the moment she had worried about. But there was no choice now. We agree, she said. Excellent. Valtar's black eyes seemed to grow larger. This will not hurt. You may feel a slight pressure. Do not resist. Sarah tried to relax. She thought about her mission, about peaceful exploration, about the wonders they hoped to discover. She thought about Earth, green and blue in space, about her daughter waiting back home, about the future of humanity among the stars. But she also thought about other things. The weapons hidden in the Defiance, the battle plans stored in her personal files, the fact that Earth's military had prepared for this mission to go wrong, her orders to protect her crew at any cost, her training in 17 different ways to kill with her bare hands, and deeper than that, stranger thoughts, what she would have for dinner, whether she had remembered to water the plants in her quarters, a song her grandmother used to sing, the feel of rain on her face, the smell of coffee, the way her daughter laughed, a book she had read about ancient Rome, worry about whether her crew respected her, pride in their achievements, fear of failure, love for her family, anger at politicians back home, hope for the future, sadness about past mistakes. All of it swirled together in her mind like a storm. Across the table, Valtar reached out with his telepathic abilities. The Mind Seeker had done this thousands of times with hundreds of different species. It was always the same. Minds were like books, organized and logical. He would read the human commander's thoughts, understand her true purpose, and then decide whether to let them pass or destroy them. He touched the edge of Sarah's consciousness and began to read. Valtar closed his eyes and let his mind reach toward the human commander. This was familiar territory for him. In his long life, he had read the thoughts of countless beings. Each species had its own mental pattern, but they were all logical in their own way. The Korthic thought in mathematical sequences, their minds like living computers. The Villani thought in colors and shapes, their emotions painting pictures across their consciousness. The Drex thought in rigid hierarchies, every thought organized by importance and function. But humans, he had heard they were different. Chaotic, other species said. Unpredictable. Valtar had always assumed this meant they were simply primitive. Young species often had disorganized minds, until they evolved better thinking patterns. He touched the edge of Sarah's consciousness and immediately found what he expected. Military protocols, mission objectives, concern for her crew's safety, the desire to establish peaceful relations. Standard thoughts for a commander in her position. Valtar smiled to himself. The rumors about human chaos were clearly exaggerated. This mind was just like any other. Perhaps slightly more complex than some primitive species, but nothing he couldn't handle. He pushed deeper, looking for hidden motivations. Was this really a peaceful mission, or were the humans scouting for invasion? Were they here to trade, to steal technology, or to establish some kind of military presence? The answers should have been simple to find. In every other species, motivation sat in the mind like files in a cabinet, organized and clear. But as Valtar went deeper into Sarah's thoughts, something strange began to happen. The military protocols were there, yes, but they were mixed with something else. Memory fragments. Sarah thinking about her daughter's first steps. The taste of chocolate cake. Worry about whether she had locked her quarters before leaving. A half-remembered dream about flying. Valtar frowned. These random thoughts were interfering with his reading. He pushed them aside and focused on the mission parameters. But more random memories kept flooding in. Sarah's first kiss. The sound of ocean waves. Concern about the engine efficiency reports. A joke someone had told her last week. The smell of her mother's cooking. This was unusual. Most minds kept emotional memories separate from operational thinking. But in this human, they seemed to exist in the same space, all mixed together like ingredients in a soup. Veltar tried a different approach. Instead of looking for specific information, he tried to map the overall structure of Sarah's mind. Every species had a pattern. The Korthik had minds like crystal lattice, perfectly geometric. The Vellani had flowing river-like consciousness. The Drex had minds like military formations, with clear ranks and positions. But Sarah's mind, Veltar, couldn't find a pattern. It was like looking at a storm system from inside the storm. Thoughts swirled in all directions at once. Present concerns mixed with past memories and future worries. Logic mixed with emotion, mixed with instinct, mixed with imagination. He tried to focus on just the logical parts. Surely there had to be some organized section where the important thinking happened. He found Sarah analyzing the current situation, considering different diplomatic approaches, weighing risks and benefits. But even her logical thinking was strange. She was simultaneously considering 17 different scenarios. In one part of her mind, she was planning for successful negotiations. In another part, she was preparing for the Zephyrians to attack. In a third part, she was wondering if they could learn Zephyrian technology. In a fourth part, she was composing a letter to Earth Command about their progress. How could one mind hold so many different possibilities at the same time? Most species could only focus on one primary thought stream, with perhaps 2 or 3 secondary considerations. But this human seemed to be thinking about everything at once. Veltar pushed deeper, trying to understand how this mental chaos could possibly function. What he found made even less sense. Sarah was thinking about the negotiations. Yes, but she was also thinking about her crew. Not just their safety and their roles in the mission, but personal details. Thompson had been having trouble sleeping. Martinez missed his wife. Park was excited about the first contact protocols. Walsh had been working too hard and needed rest. But deeper than that, Sarah was thinking about people who weren't even here. Her daughter back on Earth, who would be starting school soon. Her mother, who worried too much about the dangers of deep space exploration. Her ex-husband, who had left because he couldn't handle her career in the military. A friend from the academy who had died in a shuttle accident 5 years ago. All of these thoughts existed simultaneously with her analysis of the current situation. It was as if the human mind could not focus on one thing without also thinking about everything else that mattered to the person. Veltar began to feel something he had never experienced before during a mind reading confusion. The human's thoughts were not organized in any pattern he could recognize. They did not flow from one logical point to the next. Instead, they seemed to bounce around like particles in a gas, constantly in motion, constantly changing direction. But somehow, out of this chaos, clear decisions were being made. Sarah was weighing complex diplomatic options, calculating risks, managing her team's emotional state, and planning for multiple contingencies. All at the same time. All in a mind that seemed to have no organization at all. Veltar tried to trace how the decision-making process worked. In other species, it was like following a path. Thought A led to thought B, which led to conclusion C. But in Sarah's mind, decision-making seemed to involve thousands of different considerations, all happening at once. Like a conversation with 1,000 voices. She was considering the military implications of the meeting, but also the scientific opportunities. She was thinking about the safety of her crew, but also about the greater good of humanity. She was analyzing Veltar's words for hidden meanings, but also wondering if the translator was working properly. She was preparing for conflict, but also hoping for friendship. The Mindseeker pulled back slightly, trying to understand what he was experiencing. This was not like any mind he had ever encountered. It was not organized like a library or a computer database. It was not flowing like a river or structured like a building. It was like a living ecosystem. Like a living ecosystem. Thousands of different thoughts and memories and emotions all existing together, all influencing each other, all somehow working together to create a functioning consciousness. Veltar realized he had been reading for much longer than usual. Normally, he could map a complete alien mind in just a few minutes. But with this human, he felt like he had barely scratched the surface. And there was something else. Something that made him deeply uncomfortable. Sarah knew he was there. The awareness hit Veltar like a physical blow. Sarah Chun knew he was in her mind. Not only knew, but was somehow watching him explore her thoughts. In all his centuries of mind reading, no being had ever been conscious of his presence during the process. Most minds were like empty houses that he could walk through at will. But Sarah's mind felt occupied. It was as if she was giving him a tour while continuing to live her life normally. Veltar tried to push deeper, seeking the source of her awareness, but what he found instead made his own consciousness real. He had thought the surface chaos of her mind was strange, but the deeper layers were beyond his comprehension. Sarah was simultaneously composing 17 different responses to the negotiations. In one mental thread, she was being diplomatic and formal. In another, she was being casual and friendly. In a third, she was being cautious and military. Each response was complete and detailed, ready to be used depending on how the conversation developed. But that was just the beginning. While planning her diplomatic responses, she was also running through combat scenarios. Not simple fight-or-flight calculations, but complex battle plans. She was analyzing the Zephyrian ship structure for weak points, calculating the best escape routes for her crew, and determining how to maximize damage if forced to fight. At the same time, she was composing a letter to her daughter in her head, not just thinking about her daughter, but actually writing complete sentences about the wonders of space, the importance of courage, and how proud she was of her child's recent school achievements. And while doing all of this, she was also solving a mathematical problem that Engineer Walsh had mentioned yesterday. Something about engine efficiency calculations that had been bothering her. The complete solution was forming in her mind, even as she negotiated for humanity's future. Veltar felt his own thoughts beginning to fragment under the strain of following so many simultaneous mental processes. How was this possible? How could one mind contain so much activity without collapsing into madness? He tried to focus on just one stream of thought, but found it impossible. Every thought in Sarah's mind was connected to every other thought in ways that made no sense. Her military planning was influenced by her memories of bedtime stories she had read to her daughter. Her diplomatic strategies were shaped by a philosophical discussion she had once had with a professor 20 years ago. Her tactical analysis was colored by her emotional response to the beauty of the Zephyrian ships. It was like trying to follow a single thread in a tapestry, only to discover that every thread was woven through every other thread in an impossibly complex pattern. But the truly disturbing part was the emotional layer. Most species kept their emotions separate from their logical thinking, turning them on or off as needed. But in Sarah's mind, emotions weren't separate at all. They were integrated into every single thought process. She was afraid of the Zephyrians, but also fascinated by them. She was proud of representing humanity, but also terrified of making a mistake. She was confident in her abilities, but also humble about her limitations. She was hopeful for peaceful contact, but also prepared for violent conflict. And underneath all of this, there were deeper emotions that touched everything. Love for her crew, her daughter, her species. Guilt about past decisions. Excitement about discovery. Loneliness from the isolation of command. Wonder at the vastness of space. sadness about friends who had died, joy in simple pleasures like good food and laughter. All of these emotions existed simultaneously, influencing every decision, coloring every thought, creating a rich emotional landscape that made even simple observations incredibly complex. Veltar tried to understand how this system could possibly function. In Zephyrian society, minds were organized and efficient. One thought led logically to the next. Emotions were controlled and directed. Decision-making was clean and rational. But Sarah's decision-making process was like watching a storm create order out of chaos. Thousands of considerations would swirl together in her mind, seemingly random and disconnected. But somehow, out of this mental chaos, clear and effective decisions would emerge. She would consider the tactical situation, her crew's emotional state, the political implications for Earth, the scientific opportunities, her personal fears and hopes, relevant historical examples, possible future consequences, and dozens of other factors all at the same time. Then, somehow, all of these considerations would crystallize into a single, coherent decision. It was like watching 1,000 musicians improvise together and somehow create perfect harmony. But there was more. As Veltar explored deeper, he found layers upon layers of stored information. Sarah's mind contained not just her own memories and knowledge, but fragments of every book she had ever read, every movie she had ever seen, every conversation she had ever heard. She had memorized poetry for no practical reason. She remembered the exact taste of ice cream from a childhood birthday party. She could recall the precise feeling of sand between her toes on a beach vacation 15 years ago. She had detailed knowledge of ancient Earth history, theoretical physics, cooking recipes, military tactics, childhood nursery rhymes, and thousands of other seemingly unrelated subjects. And all of this information was somehow accessible and relevant to her current thinking. A poem about courage influenced her diplomatic strategy. A memory of her grandmother's kindness shaped her approach to leadership. A random fact about Earth biology informed her understanding of alien psychology. How much information could one mind contain? Veltar had always assumed that consciousness was limited by the need for organization and efficiency. But Sarah's mind seemed to operate on the principle that everything might be relevant to anything. Most disturbing of all were the contradictions. Sarah simultaneously believed that violence was always wrong and that sometimes violence was necessary. She thought humanity was wonderful and also thought humanity was deeply flawed. She was confident in her abilities and also constantly doubted herself. In any other mind, these contradictions would be signs of madness or malfunction. But in Sarah's mind, they seemed to be sources of strength. Her ability to hold opposing ideas allowed her to see situations from multiple perspectives. Her awareness of her own flaws made her more effective as a leader. Her simultaneous love and criticism of humanity made her a better representative of her species. Veltar began to realize that what he had initially seen as chaos was actually a form of organization so complex that his own mind couldn't comprehend it. Sarah's consciousness wasn't disorganized. It was organized in a way so sophisticated that it appeared random to simpler minds. It was like a primitive being looking at a quantum computer and seeing only flickering lights, unable to comprehend the incredible complexity of the calculations being performed. But if this was how one human mind worked, what did that mean for the species as a whole? If every human possessed this level of mental complexity, how had the Zephyrian collective ever assumed they could be easily controlled or understood? Veltar felt a growing sense of unease as he began to comprehend the true nature of what he was dealing with. This was not a primitive species. This was something entirely new and unprecedented in the galaxy. And he was beginning to suspect that he had made a terrible mistake in attempting to read the human commander's mind. Valtar pressed deeper into Sarah's consciousness, driven now by a mixture of fascination and growing alarm. He had to understand this impossible mind, had to find some explanation for what he was experiencing. But what he discovered in the deepest layers of human thought shattered everything he believed about the nature of consciousness itself. He found Sarah's moral reasoning center, and it defied all logic. In Zephyrian minds, morality was simple and clean. Actions were evaluated based on their benefit to the collective. What helped the Zephyrian people was good. What harmed them was bad. Personal survival and species survival were the highest priorities, as they were for every intelligent species in the galaxy. But Sarah's moral system was insanely complex. She had rules that contradicted each other. She believed in protecting her crew, but also in protecting innocent aliens. She valued human life, but also believed some principles were more important than life itself. Valtar found memories that made his mind reel. Sarah had once risked her entire ship to save refugees from a species she had never met before. She had violated direct orders from Earth Command because she believed those orders were morally wrong. She had sacrificed her own career advancement to protect a subordinate who had made an honest mistake. But most shocking of all, Valtar discovered that Sarah was prepared to die for her beliefs. Not just die to protect her crew or her species, which would have made sense, but die for abstract concepts like justice, freedom, and truth. She would sacrifice her own life to prevent her government from committing genocide against aliens, even if those aliens were enemies. She would choose death rather than betray her principles, even if her death served no practical purpose. She would destroy her own ship and crew if she believed it was necessary to prevent a greater evil, even if that greater evil would only affect people she had never met. This concept was so alien to Valtar that his mind simply could not process it. Every species in the galaxy followed the basic rule of survival. Individual survival, family survival, species survival. These were the foundations of all intelligent thought. But humans could choose to violate these fundamental rules. They could decide that ideas were more important than life. They could sacrifice themselves and their loved ones for principles that existed only in their minds. Valtar tried to understand how this was possible. He explored the memory patterns that led to this incredible conclusion and found something even more disturbing. Sarah's willingness to die for her beliefs wasn't a malfunction or a sign of mental illness. It was the result of deep, complex thinking about what made life meaningful. She believed that a life without honor, justice, and compassion was not worth living. She thought that survival without principles was just a form of slow death. She was convinced that some things were more important than existence itself, and she wasn't alone in this belief. As Valtar accessed her memories of other humans, he found that this impossible moral system was common among her species. Human history was full of people who had chosen death rather than compromise their beliefs. They called them heroes, martyrs, and saints. They had a word for this concept that translated roughly as honor. It was the idea that how you lived was more important than whether you lived. That what you stood for mattered more than how long you stood. Valtar's mind began to fragment under the strain of trying to understand this alien logic. How could a species survive if its individuals were willing to die for abstract ideas? How could they function as a society if personal principles were more important than collective survival? But as he explored further, he found that this impossible moral system somehow made humans stronger, not weaker. Their willingness to die for their beliefs made them incredibly dangerous to their enemies and incredibly loyal to their friends. Their complex moral reasoning allowed them to cooperate with other species even when it was not in their immediate self-interest. And then Valtar encountered something that made his consciousness freeze in pure terror. He found that Sarah was, at this very moment, prepared to sacrifice not just herself, but potentially her entire species if she determined that humanity posed a threat to innocent alien life. She had contingency plans that would prevent Earth from becoming a galactic threat, even if it meant the end of human civilization. She was sitting across from him, negotiating for her people's future, while simultaneously considering scenarios in which she might have to ensure her people's destruction. And she was at peace with this possibility. She considered it her duty as a leader to make such impossible choices if necessary. This was beyond paradox. This was a form of consciousness so alien that Veltar's mind simply could not contain it. How could a being simultaneously love their species and be prepared to destroy it? How could someone fight for their people's survival while planning for their extinction? But Sarah held these contradictory thoughts without any sense of conflict. To her, protecting the galaxy from human aggression was just as important as protecting humanity from alien threats. She saw no contradiction in being loyal to both her species and to abstract principles that might require her to act against her species. The Mind Seeker felt his consciousness beginning to unravel. He had touched something so fundamentally alien that his own mind could not process it. It was like trying to understand a new color or imagine a fourth dimension. The concepts simply did not fit into the framework of his thinking. Every species the Zephyrians had encountered followed predictable patterns. They wanted to survive, to prosper, to expand, to protect their own. Even when they cooperated with others, it was always ultimately for their own benefit. But humans could genuinely care about the welfare of beings they had never met, future generations they would never see, and abstract principles that had no physical existence. They could make decisions that benefited others at their own expense, not because they expected something in return, but because they believed it was right. And most terrifying of all, they could be happy while making these sacrificial choices. Sarah felt no resentment about the possibility of dying for her beliefs. She felt no anger about potentially sacrificing her species for the greater good. She experienced these thoughts with a sense of peace and rightness that was completely beyond Veltar's comprehension. The Mind Seeker tried to withdraw from Sarah's consciousness, but found that he could not. The sheer complexity and alien nature of her thoughts had overwhelmed his ability to process information. His mind was caught in feedback loops, trying desperately to understand concepts that were fundamentally incompatible with his neural structure. For the first time in his long life, Veltar experienced pure terror. Not fear of physical harm, but existential dread at encountering something so alien that it threatened his basic understanding of reality. He had touched the mind of a being whose consciousness was organized according to principles that simply did not exist in any other species. A being who could think thoughts that were impossible thoughts, hold beliefs that were impossible beliefs, and make choices that were impossible choices. And in that moment of ultimate comprehension, Veltar's mind simply stopped. The Mind Seeker of the Zephyrian Collective, the most powerful telepath in known space, sat frozen across from Commander Sarah Chun. His consciousness locked in a recursive loop as it tried desperately to process the impossible nature of human thought. Sarah, meanwhile, continued to negotiate calmly, aware that something had gone wrong but choosing to wait and see what would happen next. Sarah noticed the change immediately. One moment, Veltar had been sitting upright, his dark eyes focused and alert. The next, he had gone completely still, his gaze fixed on nothing, his breathing shallow and rapid. The other Zephyrians began to stir with alarm. Sarah could see panic beginning to spread across their faces as they realized something was wrong with their Mind Seeker. "Veltar?" One of them called out, but there was no response. Sarah felt a strange sensation in her mind, like a presence that had been moving through her thoughts had suddenly become stuck. She could sense confusion and terror, but not her own. Somehow, The alien telepath was trapped in her consciousness, overwhelmed by something he had found there. The Zephyrians were beginning to stand, their hands moving toward what might have been weapons. Sarah knew that if they thought the humans had somehow attacked their leader, the situation could turn violent very quickly. "Wait," Sarah said, raising her hand. "I think he's still connected to my mind. Let me try to help him." "You cannot help a mind seeker," one of the Zephyrians said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "This should not be possible." Sarah closed her eyes and tried to focus on the presence she could feel in her thoughts. It was like finding someone lost in a maze, running in circles, unable to find their way out. She had never done anything like this before, but something about the situation felt familiar. It reminded her of times when her daughter had nightmares, when she would have to gently wake her and guide her back to peaceful sleep very carefully. Sarah began to organize her thoughts, not changing them or hiding them, but simply making them easier to follow. She imagined her mind as a library, putting her memories in order, her plans in sequence, her emotions in context. She could feel Valtar's consciousness beginning to calm as she provided structure for him to follow. Like a person lost in a storm, he needed landmarks to find his way back to safety. Sarah thought about simple things: her name, her ship, her mission, the peaceful intentions that had brought them here. She projected feelings of safety and welcome, the way she might comfort a frightened child. Slowly, very slowly, she felt the alien presence begin to stabilize. The overwhelming terror faded, replaced by something like wonder and awe. Then, as gently as she could, Sarah began to guide Valtar back to the surface of her consciousness. She imagined herself walking with him through the maze of her thoughts, showing him the way out. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Valtar's eyes suddenly focused. He looked directly at Sarah, and she saw something in his gaze that had never been there before: respect, and perhaps a little fear. "Impossible," he whispered. The other Zephyrians rushed to their leader's side, speaking rapidly in their own language. Sarah caught fragments through the translators, words that meant trapped, overwhelming, and paradox. Valtar raised a hand to silence them. When he spoke again, his voice was different, quieter, more humble. "Commander Chun," he said, "what you did? How did you guide me out of your own mind?" Sarah wasn't sure how to answer. "You seemed lost. I just tried to help you find your way back. But I was the one invading your thoughts. I had violated your mental privacy without permission. By all rights, you should have left me trapped there. Or worse." Sarah shrugged. "You were in distress. It seemed like the right thing to do." Valtar stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to the other Zephyrians and spoke in their language. Sarah's translator picked up some of the words: unprecedented, complexity beyond measure, impossible thoughts made real. The conversation went on for several minutes, with the Zephyrians becoming increasingly agitated. Finally, Valtar turned back to Sarah. "Commander, my colleagues believe I have been affected by some kind of mental virus. They think your species has developed a telepathic weapon designed to incapacitate mind seekers." Sarah felt her heart sink. "That's not true. We don't have any telepathic abilities at all. We barely understand how your mind reading works." "I know," Valtar said quietly. "I have seen the truth of your thoughts. Your species has no telepathic weapons because you have something far more powerful. You have consciousness itself as a weapon." He stood and walked to the center of the room. When he spoke again, it was with the voice of someone who had experienced a fundamental revelation. For thousands of years, the Zephyrian Collective has encountered hundreds of species. We have read their thoughts, understood their motivations, and brought them into our empire. We believed we were the most advanced form of consciousness in the galaxy. He paused, looking directly at Sarah. "We were wrong. Your species thinks thoughts that should be impossible. You hold contradictory beliefs without madness. You make decisions based on principles that exist only in your imagination. You are prepared to sacrifice everything, including your own survival, for ideas that have no physical form. One of the other Zephyrians spoke up. Veltar, surely you exaggerate. No species could function with such mental chaos. It is not chaos, Veltar replied. It is order so complex that we mistake it for chaos. It is like, imagine music so sophisticated that it sounds like noise to primitive ears, but reveals incredible beauty to those who can truly listen. He turned back to Sarah. Your mind, Commander, contains more complexity than our greatest philosophers have dreamed possible. Every human thought is connected to every other human thought in ways that create patterns within patterns within patterns. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the praise. I don't think we're that special. We just think the way we think. And that, Veltar said, is what makes you extraordinary. He returned to his seat and began speaking formally, as if making an official declaration. The Zephyrian Collective hereby recognizes humanity as the paradox species. Your minds are too complex for telepathic reading, too contradictory for logical analysis, too principled for practical prediction. Sarah blinked in surprise. What does that mean for our relationship? It means, Veltar said with something that might have been a smile, that we offer you something we have never offered any species before. Not conquest, not subjugation, not even alliance. We offer you partnership. Partnership? Your species thinks thoughts we cannot think. You see solutions we cannot see. You understand concepts we cannot grasp. The galaxy is full of logical minds, Commander Chun, but you are the only species we have encountered whose thoughts are beautiful in their impossibility. Veltar leaned forward. We propose an exchange. We will share our technology, our knowledge, our understanding of the galaxy. In return, you will teach us how to think impossible thoughts, how to hold contradictory beliefs, how to value principles more than survival. Sarah felt a warmth spreading through her chest. Not just relief that the first contact had been successful, but something deeper. Pride in her species. Pride in the chaotic, contradictory, impossible human mind that she had always taken for granted. I think, she said carefully, that humanity would be very interested in such an arrangement. As the negotiations continued, Sarah couldn't help but smile. Humanity had always seen their mental chaos as a weakness, their tendency toward contradiction as a flaw, their impossible moral reasoning as a source of confusion and conflict. But in a galaxy full of logical minds, chaos had become their greatest strength. And for the first time in human history, the thing that made them most human had become the thing that made them most valuable to the stars.